Hi everyone, so in today's video, I'm going to be sharing my top 6 tips for combating writer's block. Writer's block is a controversial issue in the writing community. I'm one of those people who firmly believes it exists, just because I think that creative burnout is relevant with any art. Whether you call it creative burnout, whether you call it writer's block, I definitely think that writer's block is a thing and it can manifest in different ways. So my first tip is to write a different project. And this is kind of an obvious one, but it's also one of my favorite methods to implement when I'm struggling writing my novel. If you are writing a novel and you're having some writer's block writing the novel, I highly recommend taking a few weeks or few days to just explore a different project. Sometimes writing another novel can be a little bit difficult just because novels kind of require a little bit of a different energy than, for example, short fiction or poem might. So I actually, when I'm having a bit more trouble writing, will turn to short fiction most often, or I will try to write a new poem instead of like writing my novel, because sometimes you need a bit of a break from a bigger project, especially one that you might have been looking at for a long time. For example, the last few months I've been working on a novel called Feeding Habits, but it's been giving me a really hard time because I feel like I've been staring at it since April. I've been just diving into a bit more short fiction instead, and I find that that's a little bit easier to engage with. It also helps me feel like I'm still a writer. Sometimes writer's block has a tendency to desensitize you from the fact that you have skills and, you are a good writer. And so I find that I can just feel really down when I'm not writing my novel. And so writing a short story that teaches me, oh, I still have a really good grasp on language. Oh, this poem, I can still have like rhythm in my words is really helpful. And just kind of proving to yourself that you can still write even though you're struggling with a project, I think is quite healthy. Obviously, if jumping between too many projects doesn't work for you, this might not be the tip for you, but I find it's helpful to take like a nice break from a project that you're working on and just work on something else for a little bit. It's actually a really great way to have some creative relief, which I think all creatives need to have. So the second tip is a little bit more labor intensive, and that is to immerse yourself in your scene or to method write. So a lot of us have already heard of what method acting is, and that kind of entails the actor becoming the character. Like, for example, if a character is a professional swimmer, the actor might go out and like practice swimming or whatever. I don't know anything about swimming. I don't know why I use that example. And I actually find method writing, or in this case, I'm going to call it immersion because it's a little bit different because obviously it's not as long term. So immersion for me looks a little bit like I will try to desensitize myself completely. So remove as many of my senses as possible. So I find the most helpful way to do that is in a bath where you can kind of put your head and your ears a bit underwater. You can also use earplugs if you don't want to take a bath. And then you can like close your eyes to remove sight. I find that really quiets the brain. If you're someone like me and your brain doesn't really turn off, sometimes taking a moment to literally strip back every one of your senses and immerse yourself in somebody else's mind is exactly what you need to do when it comes to getting rid of your writer's block. So I often use this method when I find that I have no ideas for where my book is going to go. And so I'm a pantser. And oftentimes as a pantser, you don't have ideas. You're not an idea machine and nobody should expect you to be. And so sometimes I get stuck for weeks on end and I have no ideas. The bottom of the barrel is dry. And so what I'll do is I will brew up a bath and I will just go in there and I will chill, and it takes about half an hour to an hour to completely empty my thoughts. So it could take less or more time depending on how much of an overthinker you are. Basically, relax your entire body. After I'm a bit relaxed, I will begin to incorporate some visualization techniques. So visualization is a term I think in psychology. I've done it in therapy a few times. It's really effective for me. So if you're also a visual person, look into visualization because I think it's also helpful for combating writer's block. And so, for example, let's say I know where the next scene is set, but I don't know what happens. I will get in character step by step. So first, I might just close my eyes and in my head say, I am in the backyard right now. I am sitting on the grass. The weather is like such and such. There are chickadees whirring in the sky. A bird is bathing in the bird bath. It's wringing its wings, sort of getting into the details, and sort of immersing yourself into the mind state of what the character themselves are seeing. This is not just running through the scene in your head. That's a less intense version of immersion that I think you can do. It's a lot less time consuming. If you don't want to like immerse yourself in water, I have also just walked around, like paced back and forth with my eyes closed. Obviously don't run into anything. It was like in a clear hallway where I wouldn't fall down. So be careful. Or you could like lie down. So a less time consuming method of doing that would obviously be running the story through your head like you're thinking of a movie. Immersion is a little bit more than that. It's becoming the character for a shorter period of time. You can feel what the character's feeling. What are they thinking? How are they interacting with the setting? How do they feel about the setting? What are they feeling emotionally and physically? What are they hearing? Think about all 5 senses and try to pretend to be the character and note what the character is sensing. It's really hard to distance yourself from yourself, which is why it takes me a long time. But this method works 99% of the time. I think since I've been writing, this method has only not worked once, and I've used it a lot over the last 6 or so years. Every single time I sort of immerse myself in the scene, I always come away with a new idea. And so really taking that visualization that many of us do before we write a scene that's kind of just like 30 seconds of us thinking of how the scene will play out, taking that to the next level where you sort of become the character, you become one with the scene, is really helpful. It is kind of labor intensive. It's difficult. It does take time though. So it is one of those methods where you might have to carve a little bit of time out of your day. I find that it takes about 2.5 hours or so for me to sort of start to end finish the process. At points when I'm doing this, I will often start like muttering things to myself, like I'll mutter dialogue. I'm sure like if somebody else was like watching or hearing, they'd be concerned. My next tip is to listen to or narrate your work. I think this is a really underrated part of writing, but it's something that I do almost every single time I write. So I often use the text-to-speech feature in Word. If you don't have a text-to-speech feature, there's tons of free apps, or you can use like Google Translate. Most computers have one built in though, so you can just search up like text-to-speech in your search bar and something might pop up. And I will literally copy like what I wrote, I'll highlight it, and then I'll just press play and I'll listen to it again. There's something about engaging your senses when you're writing that really helps. You know, writing is not just like a mental sort of thing. It's not just creative. It's also utilizing all of your senses at once. And so I think one that us writers don't often use is hearing. We might use it for music, and we can really get into the scene when we're listening to music, some of us. And so sound is important to them. But a lot of people don't listen to their work out loud. And there's something about hearing language being told to you, or you can read it out loud, that really engages a different part of your brain. And so if you've been stuck in a scene and you've never tried listening to your work, try listening to your work and let me know how it works out for you. I often find that listening to your work creates a lot of momentum because obviously the words are being read on the page yourself. You're not reading it. So you as the writer might be able to like skip a few lines as you're reading because you know what's already there. Your mind might wander throughout the page. When somebody's reading it to you, they're reading word for word every single line. And when you get to the end, you often feel disappointed that there isn't more. And that's how I always feel when I listen to my work. I've been listening to my work since I started writing. I find that it basically always works to get me in the writing mood. It adds this intimacy that you wouldn't just have reading the work, which is a little bit more of like a clinical way of reading your work. So if you've never read your work out loud, if you've never listened to it, I highly recommend it. It always re-immerses me into the scene quite quickly without me having to do much work. So my 4th tip is to try to write a strong description. So it always surprises me how much, it shouldn't, but it does surprise me how much a strong description can make me feel confident and ready to write. When I'm struggling, if I write a nice, beautiful sentence with some great, specific, concrete detail, I basically cure my writer's block just because I love language. I love how language sounds. I love language's texture. I love experiencing language. I don't like using language as a tool. Language is part of the art. Language is the paint, and I'm using that paint in a way where I can sculpt, I can paint these beautiful landscapes. And so when you start treating language as a means to art rather than just words, which is a bit more of like an academic or formal way of looking at it, so many things can open up. And so I think a beautiful part of gorgeous language is description. And so when I'm struggling, I often find taking about a half hour to write a single sentence. You're right, I said a single sentence, one sentence. Take a half an hour to write one sentence that has these specific concrete details. You'd be surprised by how much that can motivate you to continue to write, because sometimes writer's block is all in motivation. Sometimes all you need is a spark of that writing juice back, and then you're like, oh yes, I'm going to continue. Obviously, there are different types of writer's block. I would say, obviously, one type is the I'm not feeling good about my language, and so I feel demotivated by it every single time. One is the I don't know what's happening, so I feel demotivated kind of thing, and there are many others. I find I can't break through a scene if I'm not liking the language. So taking a long time, so in this case, half an hour to write one sentence, can actually reconnect you with language in a really interesting way. So making sure that every single bead on that necklace is perfect before you move on is a really great technique. I think one of my professors, I think my poetry professor, was telling us a story about some famous author. He was saying he knew a story about them. They take like days, like one writing session is one sentence. So in the writing community, we put a lot of weight on word count, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's something that motivates you. I think that's totally fine. However, taking a long time to construct a sentence, particularly what I'm recommending to you is description. Doesn't have to be, it can be dialogue, anything that motivates you. Description motivates me because description is my favorite thing about writing, basically. But if dialogue motivates you more, you can swap that out. Whatever motivates you to write. It can even be like narrative summary, whatever part of writing that you like the most. Taking a long time to perfect that sentence until you're happy with it can do wonders when it comes to writer's block. And this actually happened to me recently. I was not feeling good about a scene. I didn't know how to break through it. I just felt sluggish. I felt horrible. So what I did is I just took some time to really imagine the language. What environment of language, what family of language can I use in this sentence that's going to make me feel good and is going to illustrate a wonderful image? And so I took a long time to pick the right verbs, the right adjectives, so that I felt like I was producing something that's not just writing, but next level art, you know? Beautiful language is really powerful in my process. And after I wrote that one sentence of beautiful description, I felt so motivated. It only took me like one day, the rest of the day, to write like basically the whole chapter after that, I think. Just take a long time to develop a sentence, but take like half an hour at minimum to do that, and you might be surprised at the results you get. So my next tip is to look for a noun, a verb, or an adjective in a book that you really like and see if you can use that word or a word similar in your scene. So this is not steal. I have had my work stolen so many times. It is not good. What comes with the internet and also publishing books in general is people might steal your work. Don't do that. That's not good. But if you see a word that you like, there's nothing wrong with taking a word from a book. Obviously, if it's like the writer's invention, maybe don't do that. But if you see like an adjective that you really like that you may have not really thought of, but you think it'll work really well in your scene, I recommend trying to implement that in your next sentence. I actually keep a list of words from my favorite books. And so whenever I come across a beautiful verb or a beautiful adjective or a very specific noun, I'll write it down just so that I might have it for later. I think that's a pretty good practice to keep. If I am feeling down about writing, I don't feel motivated, I feel writer's block, I will turn either to that list or I will open a book, read some of like my favorite books, and really immerse myself in that language. Words are really powerful. They, like I said, are not just like a vessel for a story, but also art in themselves. Language like doesn't make sense. Language doesn't make sense, but like we make it have meaning. When I'm stuck. Being purposeful with my language is one of the best ways to reduce my writer's block. So if I'm choosing a word that has texture, it has a rhythm, and it has color almost, use all of your senses. What do you see when you hear that word? What do you hear? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? Every word has sense associations. It's almost like a synesthetic, is that the word? Experience? Uncombed. So uncombed is an adjective that I think I picked up from Emma Cline's The Girls, obviously. Love that book. What do I see when I hear the word uncombed? I see like a jade comb. That's what I see. I see a jade comb running through sand. You can also think of hair. So what do I hear? I hear like scratching, like kind of like that sound, unintentional ASMR. How does the word uncombed feel? I think it feels a bit prickly. It feels like if you're running your hands through the tines of a comb. How does it smell? It smells like the metal of like a push pin. What does it taste like? It tastes acidic. It's like lemon almost, where it literally feels like prickling your taste buds. Those descriptions, what I just said to you, don't have to show up in your scene. But the word uncombed for me carries all of those images. For you, it might be something different, but what I'm saying is look at words with their sensory associations. And so when I see the word uncombed, I'm not just seeing a word. I'm seeing touch, I'm seeing sight, I'm seeing smell, I'm seeing everything, all of the senses wrapped up to one. So that's why word choice is so important, and why a word choice might be able to invigorate your process again. And when you start looking at words like that, you can unlock a whole different level of language. And when you start getting a bit more intimate with your use of language, when you start getting to know language, it'll be there for you in moments of struggle. And so I like to find new, fresh, vivid language from books that I like, or even if you just come across like a word on the internet, if you're on like a thesaurus and you find a word that you like, try to use that in your next sentence or your next paragraph. Try to like even mold what happens around that word. So the last tip is to write backstory or flashback. And so this is a tip that always works, like 100% of the time, always gets me out of a writing slump, but I never do it. Like I rarely do it like consciously. When you're struggling, consciously writing in the fictive past can be really helpful. Sometimes the fictive present is confusing, it's tiring, you don't know what to do. And so tumbling a bit into the fictive past can actually reinvigorate the present. And that's why I think dipping into a flashback is like basically the perfect way to cure your writer's block. The past obviously informs the present. Often dipping into flashback can have an interesting effect on your ideas. For a pantser like me, if I dip into a flashback that is thematically relevant to what's been happening into the novel, and then I come back into the fictive present, now the narrator has something else to be thinking about. Can they connect what's happening to them in the present with what's happened to them in the past? That's one of my favorite things to do in writing. I call it mirroring. I'm not sure if that's like the actual term, where something that happened in the past is mimicking what's happening in the present. And so you jump on the timeline just so that you can have a bit of a duality in the fictive present. Doing that can actually launch you to continue your scene, because it might teach you something about the character. It might teach you about something that's happening in the story, and so you might be able to approach the rest of your scene with a bit of a more educated eye. So that was 6 tips on how I combat writer's block. If there are any craft related videos that you guys would like to see from me, let me know in the comments. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed and thank you for watching. Bye!